An RUC patrol sets out for the border between the two parts of Ireland. Ever since the country was divided in 1922, partition has forged great differences, social and economic, political and legal. But one of the greatest contrasts is in the style of policing. On the southern side of the border, in the Irish Republic, the 10,600-strong Garda Síochána, or civic guards, are virtually unarmed and can patrol freely throughout the country by car, on foot, even by cycle. But here in Northern Ireland, it is, according to figures compiled by the international police organisation Interpol, one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a police officer. During the last 20 years, going on for 300 officers have been murdered, and another 9,000 is so injured, combating Republican and Loyalist terrorism. Accordingly, when the 12,800 men and women of the Northern Ireland Police Force, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, go out and patrol from their fortified stations, they wear bulletproof jackets, carry heavy weaponry, and travel in thickly armoured vehicles. In some areas, they require the protection of the British Army, and especially along the border with the Irish Republic, frequently deployed by helicopter because of the risk of ambush. As always in Ireland's turbulent history, there are complex and enduring reasons why the RUC is today a force under fire. The RUC was formed in 1922, but its true origins go back to 1812, when Sir Robert Peel was the Chief Secretary of Ireland. At the time, the country was in a state of rampant lawlessness, so to restore order, Peel created a network of county and provincial constabularies. Over the years, these disparate county forces were progressively moulded into a nationwide Royal Irish Constabulary. By the turn of the century, the RIC had 11,000 officers and men, and 1,600 barracks dotted strategically all over the island.
It was very severe discipline. You had to be in barracks at a certain time. You couldn't work after 10 o'clock on any, except on duty, of course.
The supervision was exacting, with frequent parades and inspections by superior officers.
You probably parade them on the guard under arms, you see, and ask him a few questions on police duties. And he would then fill in a book, an inspection book.
In 1904 or 5, one of the party, Old Irish Party, was talking about freedom and home rule for Ireland in the House of Commons. I forget which of the chamberlains interrupted him and said that the honourable member should remember that we hadn't a corporal guard in Ireland for the last 4 or 5 years when we were out to defeat the Boers. And he said not one shot was fired in Ireland during that period, he said. And all we had, he said, there was the RIC, the most loyal body of men, of policemen in the world. He said, I'd say this much, he said, that we could order them to arrest their bishop, he said, and they're 95% Catholic, he said, they would do so. I would even go so far as to say if we ordered them to arrest the Pope, they would do it.
The powerhouse of the RIC was the Force Depot, located in these buildings at Phoenix Park in Dublin, now the Garda headquarters. The trainee constables, right from the plough, slow but steady, as one officer described them, lived in Spartan surroundings, with only 3 baths between 500 men.
Well, when I went to the depot and went to the recruits' mess, I got my eyes opened because the food was terrible. Plates, well, enamel plates were big lumps broken off and showing up black. And the bowl that you got the tea in was that hot you couldn't lift it.
You got plenty of food, but it was rough. It was fairly rough. It was just, you know, there's nothing nice about it.
The margarine was First World War surplus, and so was the jam. And it was just ordinary loaf bread, and not much of it either.
You had a bed about 2 feet 6 wide, and you had a paillasse of straw, and you had a bolster of straw, and you had to fill them every 3 months.
I put a washing down for it to go to the laundry, you see, whoever took it, and I was away on duty, but I never saw the washing again. So there was an ex-soldier there said that he often washed his Simmet and Long Johns, wrung them out and put them in below the sheet to dry. So I did that, and it took 3 nights to dry them. It was like a steam bath.
You had the breakfast at 8, you started at 9, and you had to go do a parade to be inspected by the officer in charge. And the horses were paraded just the same. I think the next thing was school. It was very strict on the law and the Acts of Parliament. And then you done another drill before dinner.
The constables and officers who drilled across this parade ground and trained here were dispatched throughout Ireland to keep the peace. The peelers, as they were called, were close to the community, and the information they obtained was assiduously distilled by every police post for upward dissemination to Dublin Castle, the seat of British power in Ireland. This was an important asset in the early 1900s, with the growing demands for Irish Home Rule. At Easter 1916, these were given violent expression when armed volunteers took over a number of public buildings in Dublin and proclaimed an Irish Republic. Although the rising was easily put down by the British Army, it sparked off a campaign for Irish independence. The RIC was the prime target of the violence.
Well, you see, Collins, when he came along, because he had the idea of driving in the outposts of the RIC barracks, because he never could understand why we allowed the RIC to exist in Ireland, that they were the eyes and ears of the garrison. He said you couldn't ever get freedom while you allowed the eyes and ears to live. He even had no bones about it. He said that we should have exterminated. He couldn't understand why we didn't.
The force was driven from its homes and barracks in isolated areas to garrisons in the larger towns, and gunned down mercilessly whenever the opportunity arose. Hugh McIver remembers the danger of travelling by road.
We could see the convoys coming. The roads were white, and there is that much dust. You see, they're big 3-ton Leyland lorries with solid wheels, and they would dig trenches across the road. And for a while they caught them and the front wheels went down, you see, and then they had the ambush. But they got wise to that and used to carry planks.
For a time he was posted to a station under siege at Bandon, County Cork.
One night we're lying in, and it was a terrible old building, and you never saw daylight, you see, because the sandbags were up on the windows and the steel shutters. And I was lying on the floor, there wasn't much room, and I heard this din in the middle of the night, and I grabbed the rifle to get up. The man says beside, "Just keep quiet, don't bother. It's the flying column." He says, "They go down the town and blow something up, and away they go again." We haven't enough of men to deal with them because they'd been one of those shower banks that carried 40 men.
It was at Downing Street in London, after a ceasefire and months of negotiations, that an Anglo-Irish treaty was concluded in December 1921. It led to 26 counties forming a new Irish Free State. The 6 northern counties were partitioned off, given their own subordinate parliament, and remained under British rule. Among the first casualties of the settlement was the RIC. For differing reasons, the new administrations in both Dublin and Belfast called for its immediate disbandment. The British government agreed, and it was wound up after a farewell parade at the Phoenix Park on the 4th of April 1922. John Gorman's father played a central role in the handover.
He was the last adjutant of the Royal Irish Constabulary, and it was his job, when the treaty was signed, Collins Treaty was signed, to hand over the keys of Phoenix Park Depot to Collins, who came himself to receive them. And he rode out on his horse in his lovely uniform and handed over keys to the man in the trench coat.
Merciless reprisals against the disbanded RIC were one of the ugliest features of the Civil War, which was triggered off in the new Free State by strong opposition to partition among some Sinn Féiners.
Men in the south of Ireland were in very terrible danger, and some of them went home. I know one man that went to Donegal and he got shot.
There was one man that I knew very well, and we were both got out the gate together, and he said, "I'll be all right because I have a brother on the regulars." I met him 2 days afterwards. They just handed the notice into his hand as soon as he got off the train. You have 12 hours to get out. There he was. He had to go wherever he liked. He couldn't go home. And nearly all RIC men couldn't go home. They knew about them, every one.
In an attempt to break from the past, the Free State government decided to set up an unarmed police force, which was called the Garda Síochána, or Civic Guards. In the north, the new Unionist administration, fearing British coercion or an IRA invasion, had already built up a large special constabulary. Drawn from and supported by the Protestant community, it earned by its conduct the lasting fear of Catholics. Following partition, the northern government, which had long questioned the resolve of the mainly Catholic rank and file in the RIC, created a 3,000-strong armed police force, one of the first acts of the Belfast Parliament. It was designated the Ulster Constabulary, and by the time it officially came into existence on the 1st of June 1922, it had been awarded the royal prefix. The new force maintained the traditions, customs and practices of the RIC, including the rank structure.
You're one day an RIC man, and the next day you're an RUC man. There's no such a thing as a new uniform or badge.
The new RUC was given the dual role of maintaining law and order and protecting the borders of the new state. The Catholic community, abandoned by partition, accepted the new state with sullen resentment, and efforts to fill a 1/3 quota of the RUC with Catholics failed. The Unionists tried to keep the force on a tight political rein.
Well, the RUC itself was in a very unique relationship with the government of Northern Ireland, unlike any other police force in the United Kingdom. The RUC was under the direct control of a Unionist, a government Minister of Home Affairs, who was always a unionist Minister of Home Affairs. And therefore he was seen, the RUC were seen to be acting as agents of the government.
1922, the first year of partition, was a violent one, with 295 murders and much sectarian violence, especially in Belfast. But despite its troubled birth and intermittent periods of violent disorder, the new state quickly settled down to an uneasy tranquility that was to prevail, largely unchanged, for some 40 years, while behind the ever-present political tensions, the RUC quietly established itself even with the politically hostile Catholic community.
As we went through the 20s into the 30s, we found that the police were helpful to the local people. I remember at the time all the offsprings who hadn't got jobs had gone off to Coventry and Birmingham, and they'd sent money back to their elders, and they would have called the policeman in to write a bit of a note to thank them. So they were well known for that. They kept denying things, they filled in forms, pension forms, and brought the doctor in whenever a doctor was required, that type of thing. So in fact, the relationship there was more benign than people realised.
Joining the RUC was largely a matter of passing the entrance examination.
In 1946, this place, as known then as Assemblies College, was where the RUC held their entrance examinations. I was sitting down here at the desk. I remember to this day that I chose for my essay town life versus country life. And I sat down at the desk here, and I was beginning to lose myself in the thing. I was enjoying it because I was just back from having travelled abroad. And for the country life part of it, I chose to describe rural life in Greece. And the invigilator was walking around looking over various people's shoulders. And whenever I became enthusiastic in writing, my face got closer and closer to the desk. Now, I was writing about Greece, and I was writing about girls trampling the grapes and making wine, and comparing this to the town life. And the more enthusiastic I got, the closer I got to the page. And I was writing just about this stage, and I noticed a face beside me, and I looked up, and it was the sergeant in charge, and he was saying to me, "Boy," he says, "see, but you're good with that pen." He says, "You're a queer hand with that pen." And I got down to it again, and I was writing the olive-skinned beauties who reached down and took the hems of their dresses and pulled them up to the haw before starting the stamping of the grapes. And just for this, I heard this in my right ear. I said, "This is great stuff altogether." So in the end, I passed. But when it came to the interview, a senior officer said to me, "Well," he said, "you seem to have all the qualities that we need for the police." I said, "Well, now, this is a point at which I would like to tell you that I want to be a plainclothes detective." Well, he said, "I wouldn't be a bit surprised if someday you would make that." He says, "But first and foremost," he said, "you'll have to go to a country barrack." I said, "I don't really feel like going to a country barrack." He says, "Well, that's what you would have to do. But you see, it's interesting enough. Don't worry about it," he said. I said, "Why, what's interesting about it?" He said, "Well, you would go out round farms," and he said, "you would have the farmer to fill in his census return and count the number of pigs and poultry and the acreage under potatoes." He said, "That sort of thing." So I said, "I don't think I'll bother. Thank you very much." And I went out with their best wishes. I left Assemblies College, and what did I do? But the job that I got in the Ministry of Agriculture shortly after that involved what? Sitting adding up poultry, pigs, and the acreage under crops, etc., etc. So there you are.
While some police work may have been boringly routine, nevertheless the political tensions continued to simmer. In the late 1950s, the IRA mounted its most serious challenge to the northern state since partition. In a surprise raid on a Saturday afternoon at Golf Barracks, Armagh, the depot of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, the IRA seized many hundreds of weapons. Between 1956 and 1962, there were 605 outrages, which left 10 IRA terrorists dead and 6 policemen. The attacks were mainly in border areas, usually soft targets, like public buildings or facilities.
Two of the interesting things I think about that IRA rising were, A, it never got off the ground in Belfast, because we had internment at the time, and ringleaders were interned before anything would start. And secondly, and more significant, I think, it was round the border areas. There was a lot of attacks on police stations, but they never got the backing of the normal nationalist population. And that's the main reason why it fizzled out in '61.
The Republic of Ireland, every era, took as stern, if not a sterner view of IRA activity as the Northern Ireland government of the day, with the British government behind it. Internment took place. Skilled work was done there in getting the right people interned. And that led to a considerable drop-off in recruitment to the IRA.
The relationships across the border were very amusing. Strabane, in RUC terms, was a district headquarters, and it was also a customs station where there was anti-smuggling, particularly livestock police. And across the border in Lifford, which is just across the bridge, there was a Garda sergeant and 4 Garda, and they had no transport. And very often the sergeant in Lifford, in the Republic, I was the station sergeant in Strabane, he would ask me for the loan of a police car. And at that time we had 2. One was a Ford V8 car, and the other one was a Noston. And when he had a lot of summonses to serve in the south, or warrants to execute, or inquiries to make, I would often tell the driver of the police car to put on a civilian coat over the top of his uniform, and he would drive over to Lifford and pick up the sergeant or a couple of Garda and take them round Donegal, that whole area, serving summonses, executing warrants, or making inquiries. And this was fully reciprocated.
In Northern Ireland, as elsewhere in the world, the early 1960s were years of social liberation and political turmoil.
The situation was changing worldwide at that time. There was a sense of a desire for emancipation throughout the world, and the people were educated and had an awareness which they never had before. And we saw the violent riots in the United States, and Harold Macmillan described it as a wind of change. That wind of change was going to sweep across Northern Ireland as well. But Northern Ireland wasn't prepared for it. The police weren't prepared for it. The government wasn't prepared for it. And there were divisions within the government, divisions within the Unionist Party.
During the 1964 general election, Ian Paisley, a young Protestant preacher, threatened to remove an Irish tricolour from the Republican candidate's election headquarters at Divis Street, Belfast. To forestall Paisley, the police seized the flag, and there were serious disturbances.
My view was that that area could have been policed without the tricolour being taken out of the wind. But that violence caused a degree of alienation within the community such as I hadn't experienced before. And it smouldered a bit from then on.
I was then commissioner in Belfast, and I remember in the early 60s, we saw a pattern emerging of police being called in on bogus 999 calls into certain areas around the Falls Road, just so that they could be attacked with petrol bombs like that. And I'm afraid this is the time when that awful phrase, no-go areas, first came up. Because when we saw this pattern arising, we marked an area on our control room map, no-go. That didn't mean we didn't go into it. It meant that if we got a 999 call to that area, we didn't send one car just, we sent a backup car as well.
But another issue which arose at that time was in the Loyalist, the Unionist community. They really believed that there was a strong IRA, and that fostered the Ulster Volunteer Force. And it was not so at that time. There was no strong IRA. None at all. But that was not, the community, and minority community particularly, were not disabused of that fact. And I will say that chief officers of the police of the day, that I know beyond doubt, saw the dangers and advised the government that there was going to be a conflagration there that they couldn't deal with. That a small force such as the RUC was couldn't cope with it. And they weren't listened to. And in fact, it was sadly all too true. Much more could have been done then within Northern Ireland and by Westminster to resolve the problem, in my view.
Any person who wishes
The inevitable crunch that senior officers had foreseen came on the 5th of October 1968, when civil rights marchers gathered in Londonderry.
We do not wish bloodshed or violence.
The demonstrators demanded electoral reform, an end to religious discrimination, and the repeal of tough security powers. Use the stick, instructed one minister, as the Unionist government banned the march and ordered the police to halt it.
Just thought they could clean them off with batons. They didn't realise the coming of television and mass publicity that all that secret harassment of the Catholic community had come to an end.
I came to Derry this afternoon to stand foursquare with the people in Derry. I took part in the parade. I had every intention of doing so. As we reached the police cordon, someone on the back pushed, and we were just immediately in connection with the police. Then a policeman who obviously knew me, he made a race over from the other side, and he hit me on the head with the baton. I then was in the process of falling to the ground, and he rushed over again to make doubly sure, and he hit me a second time with the baton.
I don't know whether he's still living or not, but I think he must regret having sort of hit me in the head, and the blood that subsequently flowed, and how it sort of attracted attention to the problems of Northern Ireland.
I would say that the situation in Derry City was not well handled by the police. That was the 5th of October 1968. That exacerbated the whole situation. That could, I believe, carefully could have been better handled by the police, and the government could have shown a greater degree of sensitivity.
Over the next 9 months, the situation progressively deteriorated, with marches and counter-marches, riots and demonstrations throughout the length and breadth of Northern Ireland, stretching the inadequate and ill-equipped police force to breaking point.
Well, I don't think that anyone was ever prepared for this escalation of violence in such a way. The vehicles they had at the time were adequate. Land Rovers in the early days had just canvas sides on them. The tenders that we travelled in had glass sides.
We had the old motorcycles helmet, and then an improvised visor. Your greatcoat was quite helpful. That would have absorbed a few stones and what have you. But there wasn't the equipment there is now.
Well, the feeling was that we were doing as we were directed to do, and we tried to protect each other, protect ourselves. Certainly not going out looking for fights, but if the riot started between opposing groups or whatever, then we had to go in and deal with it. With little or no equipment. It was only after Divis Street that we ever got shields. And then the vehicles were certainly not meant to protect us from petrol bombs, because a petrol bomb just came in through the seals on it, and that was very frightening.
Well, the morale was very good, but we were being very much overstretched. The civil rights movement had started in 1968, and although there were a lot of people in the movement who felt they had genuine grievances, it was infiltrated by an element who just wanted to discredit the police as far as they could. And they organised parades at different points to commit our manpower as far as possible. And at that time we only just had over 2,500 men, and were very much overstretched.
The intensity of the disturbances steadily escalated.
A patrol car was surrounded by an angry mob. The car, I understand, was almost overturned. A petrol bomb was thrown into it, which scorched the uniform of one of the occupants. And I felt that in those circumstances, the police could hardly be blamed for firing into the air in order to extricate themselves.
It was perfectly obvious that the police only suspected or wanted to recognise trouble as coming from one direction. They lost an immense amount of credibility during the civil rights marches, because a lot of people took to the streets who were perfectly innocent, sensible people who simply wanted their rights, and the fence marches. Because a lot of people took to the streets who were perfectly innocent, sensible people who simply wanted their rights, and they found themselves being met by the law as if they were criminals or lawbreakers. So they brought this RUC and the law into considerable disrepute, the behaviour during the civil rights marches.
I'm quite aware that these charges have been made. Indeed, they are being constantly made against the police, I believe, to some extent as a result of a smear campaign which seeks to discredit them. But I can only repeat what I have said all along, that if people are prepared to make to me properly authenticated complaints about police brutality, I shall see that they are properly investigated without fear or favour.
By the summer of 1969, Northern Ireland was in sectarian turmoil, and the political leaders at Stormont continued to underestimate the seriousness of the crisis they faced.
I am quite satisfied that so far as I can see into the future, we are in a position to keep law and order.
However, events were already out of control, especially in Londonderry.
Serious rioting broke out there, and I went up on the evening of the 12th of August, and it was really a very disturbing sight. Half the city seemed to be in flames and was rioting. My men had been out on duty all day and were almost exhausted on their feet, and of course accepting a lot of casualties from bottles, stones and so on. But there was a great spirit. I mean, chaps were injured coming in for first aid treatment and insisting on going out on duty again. But the manpower problem was the big one.
Even the firing of CS gas, for the first time in the United Kingdom, failed to contain the widening disturbances.
I was on the headquarters asking for fresh reinforcements. At the same time, trouble was stirring up in Belfast, and the Inspector General was saying to me, I want your men back from Derry to help out in Belfast. So the whole problem was just overstretch and lack of manpower. And as you know, the troops came out on the 14th of August because we just hadn't the manpower to deal with the situation ourselves.
The British troops were deployed on the streets, first in Londonderry, then in Belfast, where the worst rioting since the 1920s had broken out. Many police officers had lost their nerve and believed that a full-scale IRA uprising was taking place. Armed police killed 4 people in the city. The British Home Secretary, James Callaghan, flew in to calm the situation and institute a programme of Justice Scarman, concluded that the way the police handled the disturbance caused the Catholic minority to doubt their impartiality and lose confidence in them. He criticised their use of heavy machine guns and failure to protect life and property before the arrival of the army. But he also praised their courage in a situation they could not control, and said the failure to maintain order was mainly caused by exhaustion and shortage of numbers. The task of reforming the RUC was given to Lord Hunt, the man who led the first successful expedition to climb Mount Everest. Hunt decided the RUC should become a totally civilian, unarmed police force on the English model. He even wanted it to wear blue uniforms, a change that was stoutly resisted, although a new lighter green uniform was introduced. Other important recommendations were the abolition of the B specials, the creation of a police authority to act as a buffer between the force and government, and the formation of a new part-time RUC reserve to encourage members of the community to help in maintaining law and order. Out too went the old RIC rank structure in favour of what was used elsewhere in the United Kingdom.
The Army assumed the responsibility for street disorder and subversion, which was a nonsense. The Army could never have dealt with that. They didn't understand the situation. And in any case, it was too big a step without a political reconciliation. What was needed in Northern Ireland in 1969, 1970, 71 was a genuine degree of political reconciliation. Now, the Nationalist Party was submerged by the SDLP. The Unionist Party was in a state of disarray. But that was the time where some far-seeing political initiative might have staved off the horrible violence which has been occurring since then, since 1970. But that was an opportunity lost.
Into the vacuum left by the lack of a political initiative stepped the extremists of both sides.
From the end of 1970 into 1971, we saw massive changes there. We saw vigilantes being formed in housing estates because there was communal violence and a grave threat of communal violence, Protestant against Catholic, Catholic against Protestant, because there was a great sense of fear caused at that time by the disorder. And we saw the subversives and paramilitaries quickly forming. We saw the Provisional IRA emerging out of the old IRA. We saw the UDA The UBF had already been in existence, but we saw vigilante groups. Then we saw paramilitaries. It was a very difficult time. Sadly, at the end of 1970, early 71, we had to reintroduce weaponry to the RUC, and that was unfortunate.
The emergence of the provisional IRA caused escalating violence in the early months of 1971. But after the introduction of internment without trial in August, the killings soared. In the 7 months before internment, there had been 30 deaths. But in the remaining 5 months of the year, the death toll reached 173.
Internment, regardless of the rights and wrongs of it, was badly implemented because of the lack of good intelligence. And the Army only recently had come in, and their intelligence system wasn't functioning at all. And in any way could never be nearly so sensitive as the police intelligence in normal circumstances. But these were most abnormal circumstances. It certainly, and one can not gainsay it, exacerbated the whole situation. Provided fuel to a fire which is really burning.
As the Army struggled to cope with the breakdown of law and order and the escalating violence, with 467 victims of terrorism in 1972, the RUC, taking very much a back seat to the Army, marked rather than celebrated its 50th anniversary, although it now looked, however optimistically, to the future.
We hope that soon, and very soon, we will have peace in our province again, and that the police will get down to giving the public the service that a peacetime community demands, and will surely get.
Sir Jamie Flanagan, the first Catholic to head the force, retired in 1976, and Sir Kenneth Newman, who had transferred from the Metropolitan Police, replaced him. He wanted to put the RUC back in the forefront of maintaining law and order and set the force some clear and practical aims.
Our objective is twofold. First, to bring an end to the criminal reign of terror by the most professional means and in the shortest possible time. That is, effective law enforcement. And secondly, to identify ourselves as closely and fully as possible with the community and to be sensitive to its needs and feelings. That is, enlightened law enforcement.
The force was gradually improving in competence, but it was by no means equal to the task of satisfying the expression police primacy. One of its deficiencies was its lack of riot capacity, and that had to be built up. Also, of course, in view of the psychological bashing that the force had, I think possibly it had got into the mindset of over-reliance on the Army in some respects, so that it had to regain its own sense of independent worth and importance.
Give them last time. We didn't ask the workers to leave Ballylumport.
They haven't been asked yet.
To leave Ballylumport would destroy the whole power station.
In May 1977, the Reverend Ian Paisley called a general strike to protest at government policy in Northern Ireland. By contrast with their response to the Ulster Workers' Council strike in 1974, the RUC and Newman seized the opportunity to demonstrate the changes that were well underway.
Look, I don't want no trouble with this. You are causing the aggravation. You get them away from here, or else I'll demand what it happens everywhere. Suit yourselves now.
I think it was absolutely critical that they should have done well on that occasion. Had they not done well, I think the criticism would have been quite strong, and possibly it would have been deserved had they not really come up to the mark on that occasion. In fact, they did, even though their public order training was only about 25% down the road that it was travelling. Even so, they did a very good, full-blooded job.
We're having no more of it. If you want to fight with us, we'll fight you.
The sight of police vigorously confronting loyalist rioters was a decisive turning point for the RUC, and a clear demonstration that whatever happened in the past, there was now a new, more professional and even-handed force in the making. But with persistent allegations that the police were ill-treating terrorist suspects, much still remained to be done to persuade the Catholic community of the change.
There was a frightful list of ill treatment that went to Strasbourg and was upheld in Strasbourg. coming after, of course, the famous sensory deprivation techniques, which were carried out by a mixture of the RUC and the SAS types in the British Army up in Ballykelly. And nobody ever charged, nobody ever convicted for that. Same thing with the extensive ill treatment in the Palace Barracks Hall. We listed 20 methods of physical brutality and about 24 methods of psychological ill treatment in Madonna and Castlereagh. Nobody charged, nobody convicted. I mean, the police force obviously were allowed to break the law.
These allegations reflected a heavy police reliance on confessions, particularly by suspects being questioned here at Castlereagh Interrogation Centre.
One had hosts of spurious accusations from people that confessions had been made as a result of improper methods. Now, all of these allegations were scrupulously investigated, and while it was not possible to prove the falsity of those allegations in every case, there was quite a lot of documented evidence that these allegations were fabricated.
The Bennett inquiry concluded that there was a coordinated and extensive campaign to discredit the RUC, but it also found that a small number of RUC men had gone too far in questioning prisoners.
That more or less brought the ill treatment to an end, but nobody was charged and nobody was well, there was a few charges, but nobody was convicted.
Despite the Castlereagh controversy, the RUC regained much of its confidence during Newman's period of command, which marked the turning of the tide against the terrorists. His successor, John Herman, pushed ahead with more reforms, but there was no respite from the continuing violence which sucked the force into fresh controversy. In 1981, police tactics were questioned during grave public disorder after 10 IRA prisoners starved themselves to death. In 1982, 6 unarmed suspects were shot dead in 3 incidents, provoking allegations that there was a shoot-to-kill policy. 2 years later, when Sean Downs was killed by a plastic baton round, controversy raged again.
They didn't wait till the Protestants got to Castlewellan to have their protest. They tried to trample them down at every road and every field and every byway in the country. But we'll not surrender to the Papists, to the rebels, to the IRA, or to the RUC.
Soon afterwards, the force was involved in serious conflict with loyalists when Herman confronted the long-running problem of provocative orange marches.
Come on, Herman. Who are you? The people elected me. Who elected you? Who elected you?
But these clashes were minor compared with the high feeling unleashed after the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement at Hillsborough in November 1985.
It was a political initiative by 2 sovereign states. And it was not my business. My business was to ensure that any political initiative was resolved within the democratic process and not by mob rule on the streets. I had a quiet, firm determination that there would not be a repeat of 1974, when the subversives and politically motivated strikes would bring the whole state down around them. And I was quietly determined. And I knew, in fact, that the RUC could handle that situation. But I also knew that if they couldn't do that, then they were not the force for Northern Ireland. And was quite prepared, if necessary, to see them sacrifice themselves. But I knew that they would do their duty.
After the Anglo-Irish agreement, particularly the parades in Portadown, where the police went through a very difficult time at their homes, which were stoned, daubed, attacked, petrol bombed, shot at, over something which he had nothing to do with, no hand in, either to say yea or nay to it. But he was expected to police that, and that had a devastating effect on a great number of policemen.
This is a reward for living here. I've lived in this area for 50 years, and this is what your neighbours will do to you, you know. So the boys that did it, you know, I was going to say they'll have their conscience to live with, but the same boys probably hasn't got a conscience, you know.
There were 500 police homes attacked, and we had to move, I think, coming up to 150 homes, families from their homes. And indeed, I had gone to the Association of Chief Police Officers in England and asked for their quiet cooperation to make many hundreds of houses available to me to house the families of police officers should that extreme loyalist violence continue.
Hell of a job, you know, to do. So I always thought I did it without, as they say, without fear or favour, but obviously not to everybody's satisfaction.
But whatever else, because of police control and functioning in 85, 86, since that year, 86, there had been no violence in the streets. There had been no political demonstrations, no confrontations of any serious consequence. That is a good foundation for the RUC.
But this good foundation has been bought at a terrible price. Between 1922 and 1969, 13 members of the RUC were murdered by the IRA. Since then, going on for 300 officers have given their lives fighting terrorism, a tenth of all terrorist victims.
Funeral dirge gets absolutely ingrained into your soul, and especially on a stone grey Ulster day, and with the rain bucketing down and so on. I think it can easily get to personnel and begin to, it could affect their morale. The wonderful thing was that it didn't.
I was going to so many funerals from 1974 onward, and I did find it very stressful. In particular when I became Chief Constable, but it was important to the families, and it's very important to let them see that their husbands matter and that their grief is recognised. It was after the death of my late wife in 1986 that I realised, with a degree of personal grief, that this could possibly adversely affect the objectivity which was required of me to conduct the force, despite political pressures and other community pressure.
It creates a feeling of, I suppose, helplessness, that we cannot protect our own. Never mind the people we are paid to protect, which is the public. And we feel we fall short in not being able to look after our own colleagues. Perhaps they're slightly to blame for it.
Apart from those who have lost their lives, almost 9,000 RUC officers have suffered injury, many of them being maimed for life in terrorist attacks.
Earlier in the day, a soldier had been killed. He'd been shot in an ambush, and we went down part of the follow-up operation to get a few details and details of the scene of the murder. And on the way back, we ourselves must have drove through an ambush. And my memory of the ambush was suddenly, well, we were driving along quite normally, and suddenly I felt this sensation, just your body seemed to erupt. There was a funny sensation, like and a lot of heat involved. It's hard to describe. And at that stage, I think I realised I heard shots, so I think at that stage I realised I'd been hit. But the feeling in the bottom part of my body was numb, and I thought, right, well, if we're under fire here, if I can get a few shots off, at least it'll maybe make them put their heads down. So I can remember trying to cock the Sterling. I was carrying a Sterling at the time, and my colleague who was driving the car, I can remember him looking over, and I think he thought, I mean, what the hell's he doing here? What's going on? He didn't realise at this stage. And then suddenly he slumped over the wheel. So at that stage I realised this was for real. I could see him slumped over the steering wheel. He was wearing a corduroy jacket at the time, and I could see spurts of blood coming out of this jacket. And at that stage I thought, well, this is it. There's no way he's going to, drive the car. So I was expecting the car to run off the road, but he managed to rise up again from the steering wheel, and I think at that stage both of us grabbed the wheel, and we drove the car back approximately 2 miles from the scene. And when we got closer to the police station, I think he realised he couldn't. They hadn't the power to stop the car. So I can vaguely remember the car running into the gates of the station. And then suddenly he thought, well, the army, the guy in the Sanger is going to open up. He's going to think this is an attack on the station.
I was on a normal routine mobile patrol with 2 of my colleagues. It was a nice summer's day, and we were doing as we used to do in between our duties. We were having a chat, having a yarn, a conversation about football match the night before, or about where we were going that night. I remember myself and one of our colleagues had planned to go to a barbecue that night, and we were looking forward to going to it. So we'd been having, we would say, a bit of crack in the car. We drove along the road, and we saw a parked vehicle on our near side. It was pretty much the norm. As I say, you cannot get too paranoid at times about vehicles parked. You can't check every vehicle parked on the side of the road. We drove past the vehicle, and as we did so, everything just went black. I was thrown from the car, and the 2 colleagues were trapped inside the vehicle. I couldn't see, and I felt at the time an awful lot of pain. I knew I had been badly hurt.
I was very aware of severe pains. In fact, I can remember lying on the footpath, I think screaming my head off, get me something for the pain. It was completely unbearable.
I knew I needed help, and I needed help quick. People in the immediate area did their best to help us. It seemed an eternity before we got any help, both from our own colleagues and from the hospital services.
It was a spinal injury. The lower part of the spine had been hit, and my right leg, left leg were both paralysed. But eventually my right leg came back to as near perfect as possible. The left leg, it made no progress. It's paralysed. It's completely paralysed, and I'm left with severe pain.
I lost 2 limbs as a result of the explosion. I've been permanently disabled. I had to learn to walk again. I was wheelchair bound for a time. A short time after the explosion, as a result of injuries, one of my colleagues died, and the other one was also seriously injured.
I was aware that my mother hadn't been coming in to see me, and my father always approached the bed, and he always, you know, would have made an excuse and said, you know, well, she didn't feel like travelling up today. And after some time, weeks, I can remember one day when my minister approached the bed first, and I don't know what made me, something went through my mind. I thought, right, something has happened at home. But anyway, the story was that she and my mother and father had rushed over to the hospital when I was injured, and she dropped dead at the side of the bed. And well, no one could tell me this. I suppose it would have affected my recovery, so I wasn't told for quite some time. So it was a double tragedy. And one way I can, you know, you join the job and you accept the risks, but for this to happen, you know, to my mother, it just ruined her whole family. So sometimes people talk about forgiveness and what have you, but I could never forgive for that aspect of it.
There's no such thing as ultimate protection or ultimate security. People must leave their homes in the morning to go to work, and they must come back in the evenings. And you try to lead a normal life. We've had men shot at home. We've had men shot going to and from their work. So it does create problems.
Despite Northern Ireland's violent image, only 1/5 of the criminal offences recorded each year are connected with terrorism. Indeed, almost twice as many people die on the roads. Successive crime surveys have shown that aside from the endemic terrorism, the level of law-breaking in Northern Ireland is in fact lower than in any other police force area in the United Kingdom. But for all its growing effectiveness, the RUC has so far been unable to win Catholic confidence through the legacy of history and more recent controversies, like the Stalker affair, the treatment of terrorist suspects, the policing of parades, and the leaking of security documents. All have provoked vociferous criticism and combined to force the RUC into what is going to be a long uphill struggle to win the full-blooded consent of the entire community.
I made about 2,000 official complaints, and I was interviewed by many very courteous RUC men and very attentive and did everything correctly according to the book, many very good men. But they put out this rather wild kid of policemen with the green jerseys on the DMSU and various grades up to what we call the shoot-to-kill types. They would need to be severely controlled and severely inspected in regard to the language and the behaviour, because to go into a certain district, as they have in County Tyrone, certain districts in County Tyrone and County Armagh and so on, and to assume that everybody there is a terrorist or an IRA man or is hostile to the police as such, that is completely gratuitous assumption. Sometimes you get the impression they want to keep the troubles going.
We did not create the position that we're in. My officers do not want to go around in armoured vehicles. They don't want to wear heavy flak jackets. They don't want to go around with Heckler and Koch submachine guns. They would like to go back to the sort of policing that was known in this province 25 years ago.
When I speak to police, when I come to know them and their families, there's a great feeling, which they can't speak publicly about, that they want to do normal police work, that they see the present situation as something that's thrust upon them, and that they too are prisoners of history. And to me, the RUC is just as much a prisoner of history as any other branch of life in our community today.
It's such a shame when you think that the bulk of the RUC has never known anything else, only conflict in the community that we seek to police. Frustrated, I don't know. I think they would love to see an end to all these terrible troubles. They would love to see the community reunited and they'd love to be able to do a proper policing job in the province that they have chosen to serve, and the job that in their career that they have chosen themselves.
I remember a time when this society, this community, was sharply divided in terms of whether you accepted or rejected the police. As we speak now, my consciousness, my reaction, my feeling is that we've come a very long way, and that the vast majority of people may have their own historic reasons for finding it hard to support the police actively, but there are very, very great changes taking place in the overall attitude of the society to the police. And I believe that the debt that this whole community owes the police is absolutely incredible.
There have been tremendous reforms made in the RUC. It is no longer under control of a unionist Minister of Home Affairs. And the IRA and terrorists would want you to believe that it's a totally sectarian force. That's exactly the way they want it, because they take great delight in shooting Catholics who are members of the RUC, thereby intimidating others from joining the RUC so that they can then say it is a sectarian police force.
Regardless of the risks and continued turmoil in Northern Ireland, there are up to 15 applicants for every post available in the RUC, but not enough from Catholics, who only make up 1/10 of the force strength.
I think it's terrible that we can't recruit from the minorities the way we want to. But I can understand the pressures on young people coming from the Roman Catholic background. It's difficult for them. But we're still recruiting, thank goodness.
This force has worked enormously hard at attempting to display on a daily basis at all levels an even-handed and impartial approach. And I think we have got significant praise recently from the minority community. I think we deserve their support. We certainly need their support. And I've made it quite clear that I want more members of the minority community in the RUC. My advertisements have made that clear, and that is an absolute commitment. And we will welcome them, but of course what we want first and foremost are good policemen and women, rather than people of any particular persuasion.
Can a Catholic join the RUC and remain and be quite sure that he'll have his Catholic religion, his or her Catholic religion, and his or her nationalist politics, if that is the politics, fully respected? I mean, we don't want to go into a police station and find RUC men around wearing UVF emblems or so on that used to happen in the 70s, you know, or singing out party songs, or referring to Catholics as Fenians. It's all that. Is the atmosphere such that a Catholic can join the RUC and be quite sure that they will not be insulted in respect of their religion or in respect of their nationalist politics if they follow that kind of politics? That is a very big question.
As it marks its 70th anniversary, the RUC today is a very different force from that formed in 1922.
They're probably more intelligent on the whole. I mean, we have a number of police now who've got degrees and so on in police time. The women are always of a high standard because we've been able to be more selective with them, more coming forward for recruitment than can ever be accepted.
As I tell people nowadays, when you're stopped on the road today by an RUC man, you're stopped by someone who's educated. The man who's leaning in your window asking you for your license or whatever is quite likely to be a man who's in the 2nd or 3rd year of a law degree. I would say myself that as a police force and as men working with the public, I don't think they have any equal.
One thing, and I'm being old-fashioned now, I don't think the average policeman cares so much or so concerned with his appearance as he used to in the old days. I mean, as you know, we used to not recruit anyone much under 6 foot, and were more concentrating on drill and smartness than perhaps was necessary. But that was a big comparison. I think in the old days they looked the part more, perhaps, but hadn't the brains of the present policemen.
The RUC is financed by the Northern Ireland Police Authority, which provides the force with everything from paper clips to patrol cars. It also acts as a link with the community.
It's a body made up of lay people, and therefore they see what goes on within the community. They come from all walks of life, and they're committed, bringing their community role back, to making sure that the police have total support. We can't tell the Chief Constable what to do. What we can do is to advise him on the things that we gather from the public and from the community. Everything that has happened in the last 2 and a bit years has convinced me that it is an outstanding force. It's even-handed, it's fair-minded, it's resilient to an extraordinary degree. It is supported at frontline level by families whose willingness to live in circumstances of a constant threat is wearing by any standard. And the fact that they can do so, and do so so willingly, with high morale and so often with an enormously good sense of humour, is a tremendous tribute to the RUC. I think this force stands alone anywhere in the world in its capacity to take so much for so long.
A compassionate, understanding police force. They can never cease working on that. As this community has a long distance to go, it has a long way to evolve to get reconciliation in the community, and find a way ahead for this island and certainly the north. It's a serious problem. So the police must continue to evolve. Well led, sensitively led, well trained, and capable within that training and the capacity of the recruits to meet the changing needs of the community, as we were a little bit inept in doing in 1968-69 period. But there is a future for the police only if it gets, and who better could I quote than the Cardinal Cahaldili recently, that the police must be of the community and serve the community. And I mean of it by being totally representative of it. That must happen. And that will be the way forward. But there must be a political solution and a lot of community, social reconciliation and understanding as well.
The RUC as a professional police force, by and large, let's be fair, leaving aside the political aspects, are very good. They're very good on traffic, they're very good on youth work, they're very good on drugs, they're very good, very professional, and most courteous, certainly mostly to the like of myself. Well, they're courteous to the poor Catholics, some of them are not, but most of them are. Therefore, I mean, it's an attractive career in many ways, but the political aspects will have to be hammered out of it.
We must move to a position whereby we can eventually get out of those armoured Land Rovers, put down those flak jackets and long and short firearms, and work towards a general community-based policing service. That doesn't mean going soft. That just means keeping our options open and working within the community and with other arms of government and elsewhere to do what is necessary for all the people here.
Well, the future depends a lot on outside people, such as politicians. The police will continue to do the job. Whatever the laws are laid down for them to administer, they will do it. And they'll just go on doing it. New men will come in, new ideas will be formulated, and if the politicians, I believe, can help in any way, and I'm sure they're willing to do this, then I always think there's a bright future here. There has to be. Really, all the sacrifices they made and the deaths of their colleagues, it can't go for nothing. It shouldn't.